Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Cloud Bytes TV, where we're going to look at building out a wizard using Lightning Web Components. So in one of our previous videos, we had a series of Lightning Web Components that we built out that were different Aura components. There was also a recent video I put up of a Lightning Web Components tasting menu. And one of the pieces of feedback that I got from that was it would be great to see some more bits around events. So hopefully we can see some different events here, how they interact together. I think a wizard component is just an interesting one to build out anyway. So let's get started. On the screen here, you can see a really rudimentary sketch, and this is the kind of layout I was thinking of for our wizard. So we have one overall main component, which is the first big outside red box, and that is our wizard. And in there, we're going to have two really sub areas or subcomponent areas. The top one is going to be our progress bar or progress indicator. And the internal one is going to be our form, where we fill out some details and then can hit the next button. Now, there are a few limitations we have in Lightning Web Components that mean we can't make this as dynamic as I really wanted to, or as flashy as we want to. For a start, we can't go away and create dynamic components. There's no a.create component like there is in Aura. We cannot use expressions in some of the values, so it has to be bound to a value with a getter, not to an expression. So we'll talk through some of those as we go, but hopefully you'll still like what we build out here, and it will give you a better understanding of how we can compose things together. So let's switch over to our code. And if we see here, the first thing I'm showing is our wizard. And this wizard, pretty simple. At the top, we have a lightning card declaration, and we then have 3 progress bars. Now, I got a little bit carried away and built out a progress bar, which we can pass in different indicators to. So I'm showing all 3 different options here. You might want to see a progress bar as just a bar that goes from 0 to 100. You might want to see it as an indicator, so kind of the points along the way, or you might want to see it as a path, and those will be displayed in line for us in our component when we look at the wizard finally. And we just pass in some set of steps and which step we currently are on. Okay. And then our progress bar is then going to handle displaying that. And so that nicely encapsulates that, and we can reuse this wherever we want it, in fact. We then have 3 if templated statements. So this is where I mentioned about those expressions. Ideally, here I'd like some sort of expression syntax where it says if we're on, if the current step equals step 1, display this, else step 2, or allow us to inject components, but we can't do either of those things. So what we have to do is put all of our wizard components down. So step 1, 2, and 3 here, C-wizard-step 1, step 2, and step 3. Put them on the component, and have them templated to know which step they're meant to be on. So it's a minor drawback. It's not as flexible as we like, but it's still pretty good. And then you can see here we have our components all of them have an on next handler, and so that's to handle the button that clicks for next. And so within each component, we're going to have a next button that's going to take us along our journey. We're going to let that deal with actually doing the manipulation of the data itself. And then all we need to do on our wizard is know that the next has happened and then kind of switch along to the next components. In order to allow us to pass data between them, we're going to use this contact ID. And so when I was thinking about the correct way of structuring this, for a wizard, we're going to have some shared data. And so we're typically going to be looking at one or a couple of records that we're working with across. So it might be that we have, for example, here, we're going to be creating a contact throughout our journey. And as we go through, we want to be able to pass that data, data on so that our next wizard step can know about it, but we don't want to be passing all the data. In a future video, I might quite like to look at something like a Redux style state manager for this, and how we could work with that. But for now, what we're going to do is just pass the contact ID between the different wizard steps, and then the steps can then get the contact data they need. And we'll see how we're doing that in a minute. So that's all that we have here. They're quite nice and simple, and this means our wizard is easy to work with, well encapsulated, and if we wanted to add additional steps, we could do. In terms of the JavaScript, we've got a navigation mix-in being added in, which is slightly different than normal. We'll talk through that in a minute, but one of the big things by having the navigation mix-in is that you have to update your extension here so that it extends navigation mix-in and include the lightning element as part of that. Here I have our 3 steps defined, so I've hard-coded these, but we could have them generated from some sort of custom metadata if we wanted. or something like that. I've started off on step number 1, and that has index 0. So there's a bit of logic we've got to deal with first step, and also dealing with where we are in terms of our array of steps. We have the current index, as I mentioned, and then we have our contact ID, and that's the thing we're going to be passing backwards and forwards. We then have our getter methods for step 1, step 2, and step 3. So it just says, is the current item, i.e. 1, equal to the value of our step in the correct spot? You can see the value is 1, 2, or 3. So really simple there, just returns a Boolean for doing that switching. And then we've got this handle next method. If we just jump back over here, we can see that for each of these components, whenever an event called next is fired, our handle next is going to be called. And we'll see how we both fire that next event, but how we handle it. Now, we're not actually bubbling the event, we're not propagating it up the DOM, we're just having an on handler. And this is really good because it tightens down the security model for us nicely. We don't have to worry about anywhere else in the DOM or further up the tree dealing with it. Only the component that's holding it knows about it. So that's really good for us. And all this method is doing is it's getting the contact ID from the event's detail. I'll talk through how that works in a minute, but effectively on any custom event you fire, there's an attribute. You can pass in an object where there's an attribute called detail, and on that detail you can include data. Now, there's a discussion around what data we can include because it's primarily primitives you should use. There's nothing to stop you passing objects, but there are reasons not to do so. So we'll talk through that in a minute as well. We then have a bit of logic that just says if the next index is the same as our length, i.e. we're already at the last item, then what we're going to do is just log out the contact ID, and then we're going to go and we're going to navigate to view that new contact we've created. Otherwise, we're going to increment the current index, and then we're going to set the current page using that. Very simple, just to navigate along, okay? This is really quite nice and easy code. The most complicated thing in here is this navigation mixin.navigate. And all that's going to do is just allow us to redirect the page. If you go onto the Lightning Web Component guide, there's a bunch of examples of different ones of these you can use and work with. So I recommend going there and having a look through them. But you just effectively say what type of page you're going to and give it some attributes. Really quick and easy. So let's jump over to our progress bar, because as I mentioned, I've tried to be a bit clever with our progress bar. And so what we've got is we actually have 3 different templates within our progress bar. Because when I was thinking about how I'd want to show this, sometimes it might be easiest to show a path with the labels, sometimes the indicator, and sometimes it'd be best to show just a progress bar. And so we have all different options here. We have first, again, the template with an if true. If the type is an indicator, then we're going to show a progress indicator, and we're going to have each of our steps out there. If it's a path, we're going to show a path, and if it's a bar, we're going to show a bar, and we're just going to have the value being progress. So really simple things here. For both the progress indicator instances, we have a loop that goes through for all of our steps and puts out the label and has the value and uses the value as a key. Really quick and easy for us there. So let's have a look what we've got here. So we have 3 API attributes. We have steps, type, and current step. So these are going to be attributes that we can set from our wizard. And if we pop back here, you can see steps, type, and current step are all set. Note that if you have an attribute which is camel case, so current step with a capital S, it then gets changed into an attribute with a hyphen in the middle or a dash. Okay, so really useful for you to know there. So get those in, and then we're going to start using them. So our is indicator, is bar, and is path getters, they're just, again, because we can't do expressions, they're just going to return true if it's the same matching type. We then have our progress, and this get progress method is again to allow us to change what step we are into kind of a percentage completion. And there's a little bit of logic. I ended up actually drawing this out on a whiteboard because even though I have a maths degree, very basic math still sometimes boggles my mind. So if you imagine we have 3 steps, when we're on step 2, we're actually 50% of the way along the bar, if that makes sense. So what we need to do is then get the number of loop through the steps and just make sure that we correctly position it. We do this by, excuse me, by jumping through all the steps in our array. If the value matches, we set the position, and then we just go away and return the position divided by the total number of steps minus 1. Okay, and we return that times 100, so it's a percentage. Really nice and easy to use. And yeah, I kind of went down that route just because, again, wanted to see the different options and what they would look like, but also to give some flexibility in the future. For our steps then, we're going to use the Lightning Record Edit form to help us work with our contact record. So we have the first one here, which doesn't have a record ID, so there's no record ID passed in, so it's going to create a new record instance for us. We have our messages tags, if there's any messages we want to display, and then we have first name, last name, and birth date we're going to capture just in input fields, and a button that's going to do next. Because it's got the type submit, it's going to save, and then on the save, so when that's successful, we're then going to call our handle success method. So because we're using Lightning Record Edit form, there's certain buttons we can default in there. In the same way with a Visualforce controller, you can use some of the Visualforce standard controller methods. So really nice and easy for us. Look at the JavaScript, really simple. Single handle success method, captures the event, gets the ID from that, and then dispatches it back. So we dispatch our new custom event called next. That's then going to be handled by the handle next. And then it just passes back the ID that we've gathered. Okay, really, really simple for us to work with. Step 2, same thing, except this time we're passing in a contact ID and we've got 2 different fields we're capturing. Again, literally the same code all the way along. We capture our contact ID, so we have an attribute this time to do that. So we can see here in our wizard, we have contact-ID on step 2, and we're passing in the contact ID. And then in our JavaScript, we're just going to again do the same, save, capture that on success, and move on to the next step. Step 3, again, capturing languages and a description, just a custom field, just to show that that's easy to do as well. And then finally on step 3, I'm going to fire the next. And then because we get the last step, it should navigate us away. So really simple and easy code for us to work with, shows how we can use events without propagating them, and do some very simple navigation. And I mean, there's what, maybe, so if we say 23, so 46, maybe 69. So we're probably looking at about 150, 200 lines of code all told here. Most of that's just boilerplate code, nothing crazy in here. So let's have a look at what this looks like. So you can see here I've got my wizard. And what I'm going to do is start entering some information. So I'm going to enter Paul, my last name. I'm going to enter just a date for the date of birth. We'll just say I was born on April Fool's this year. I'm going to hit next. You can see it moves along my progress indicators. I've got all 3 here. I'm going to put in a fake mobile phone number, email address. Again, it moves us forward, and then finally I can put in my languages, so Apex, JavaScript, and then Paul's contact. I hit finish, it's going to navigate us over to our record, and we can see all the details that I've just entered are saved in there. So it's really, really useful and powerful for us. So a nice example here of a wizard that we can build together that just shows you how you can combine some components, how you can have a component such as the progress bar at the top that allows you to just change a few attributes and get different looks and feels on it, so you can use it again and again. But really just a simple wizard that shows how we can pass data between things without having to do lots and lots of events and callbacks everywhere. I hope you found this useful. Just a reminder, I recently released a course on Apex testing, so if you've enjoyed any of the videos we've had before about unit testing Apex, it's on Udemy. There's a link in the description below. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a like, hit subscribe, and look forward to seeing you on our next video. Thank you. Bye now.